Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you had a nice dinner and you are enjoying the conference so far. I'm Diego Jarne. I'm a partner in PwC. I'm in the cloud engineering, data, and AI practice. Together, PwC and Microsoft, we are helping our clients transform through AI. We will talk today about how we move from envisioning to experimentation. Some of you might have been defining some use cases initiatives for some time. Some of you might be already building POCs, MVPs, putting those things in production. And then what is that you need to really go full scale, right? Do you need a better data state? Do you need ontologies? What are the things that you need to go full scale? In order to do that, like some of the barriers we are seeing are a workforce transformation, upskilling, the teams having the right tools. So we will talk a little bit about that as well, and how we are embedding responsible AI early and through the whole process. So without further ado, we have today Prashant Mehrotra, Chief AI Officer from US Bank. Thank you for coming here today. And Ken Rosema, Partner GPM from Microsoft. And I think today is your 25-year anniversary with Microsoft.
It is, yeah. So great to be here, 25 years, yeah.
So to start at the beginning, the first question the audience, I think, will be interested on is, what helped you to move from the envisioning stage to really start experimenting at your company?
When I think about it, there's a lot of excitement. There's also, folks are doing experiment on their own. Harnessing those folks and their ideas and their excitement to take those capabilities and apply that in an enterprise environment, allowing them to try and pilot in a limited environment, and of course seeing how well it actually works. It's one thing to have my kid write his paper using AI, generative AI. It's altogether different to try it in a business enterprise environment, heavily regulated, if I may actually say. But it was harnessing the power and the excitement of individual folks in the business lines, and seeing those ultimately turn into a much better experience that we are delivering for our clients. Those were the key things that we found interesting.
Interesting. So having champions.
Having champions is key, to trying anything new.
What about you, Ken?
Yeah, one, and I know we'll probably talk about this later, but I would start by just putting a plug in for responsible AI. Like, I don't think you start anything without at least going through that process to make sure you understand what you're getting into. And so just like, even from an experimentation phase, like, okay, what are you doing for responsible AI when you start something? And I think once you're through that, then it's a little bit of almost like a startup culture that you build in your team. Like, okay, we got some idea, something, we're gonna measure something, we're gonna make something efficient, we're gonna discover some new workflow, some cool idea that you're gonna start with this AI, build those measurements, and then get in there and do that startup and see, like, hey, did this thing actually work? Did we learn something new? Did we discover something we had no idea we were gonna discover when we did it? Or maybe it didn't work, right? And then, like, okay, well, maybe your startup doesn't progress to the next round of funding because it didn't deliver the results, or it was too difficult to achieve it. And so I think kind of building that culture of the startup in your teams and in your practice is a good way to really take it out of that experiment and to really start to develop it into your ecosystem.
Yeah, and when we were talking before the panel, I really like that point about embedding responsible AI when you are even identifying potential use cases. I think sometimes really organizations are looking at what is the ROI and focusing on the ROI, and might be like one with a lot of ROI, but then the responsible AI might limit some of that capability. So I think doing that earlier on is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, AI is incredibly powerful all the way through, and I think, that's really cool. That's also, in a lot of people's eyes, a little scary and potentially a little dangerous. And so, that responsible AI, culture and set of values being embedded is very important up front.
So I think like that first step from having a vision, putting your frameworks, responsible AI, and start doing some pilots and use cases, MVPs, putting into production. I would assume like most of you are there, right? But I've seen a lot of organizations struggle to move from that experimentation stage to then let's really do this enterprise-wide. I think that's a stage when really we talk a lot about organizations are looking at ROI at individual use cases. But we think it's better to kind of really look at that ROI when you have like a program, because you are really doing things like doubling your revenue, keeping the same headcount. Like that story, we think that is more interesting. But in order to that full scale, like we are seeing sometimes like limitations on your data state, right? So it would be great to hear from you. What was kind of one example that has been bringing real ROI, and how were you able to move from the experimentation phase to the scale, and what were the main barriers?
Yeah, I think it's really important to, as we think about, running pilots, the whole let 1,000 flowers bloom strategy, it works good at the pilot stage. But when you have to place the right strategic bets, in my opinion. So one of the things that we did early on was we identified a few key areas. So we'll let everybody experiment, we'll let everybody get excited, but also trying to use the limited resources and the limited talent we have, focus on a few key areas, and then work on scaling a few pilots, knowing that at every stage you are going to have a drop-off, right? Some of the things are infeasible, some of the things just won't deliver value. They are just probably more complex, so the technology is in there. So one of the things that we, as we've tried to focus on those things, two things, and I can get into details of the examples, but two things we focused on was, one was delivering the right client experience, and creating more capacity in our developer community. I mean, we have a large development team. How can we actually enable them? So, everyone here has that, probably every week ends up calling, some 800 number, getting stuck, getting passed around, takes minutes, if not hours, to actually get to your answer. But the answer you are looking for is locked in some knowledge vault somewhere. And I like that example from two fronts. Number one is that knowledge and that data is in all modality, all different places, and for somebody who's on the phone with a client on the other side asking a question, response time can be minutes. Now, Gen AI, taking into account your role, your access, and everything else, can actually provide you that answer. I mean, we went from multi minutes to under 15 seconds. And then, eventually, it will allow clients to self-service themselves. You still, contact us and get the answer for more complex things, more personalized service, but now you can actually get that answer. But fundamentally, if we don't have the data, if we don't have those data collated, it's very difficult to provide the answer, and that's when you get passed around. So what we found was, so now, data problems, and I ran data for Capital One before I joined Allstate and US Bank. data problems have always existed. AI has made them visible at a scale like never before. And if you don't get a handle on data, you don't get a good governance program on the data side, you can be somewhat successful using AI and Gen AI. You just will never be able to unlock the full potential. So I mean, what we are seeing is we have thousands of people using that capability, providing a better and faster answer. We are able to onboard new associates who can actually be more productive faster. And now we are looking at those knowledge bases and seeing how it can be much more machine friendly, whereas it used to be more, somebody has to read.
Awesome. Yeah, when I think about scaling AI, like there's a bit of sort of classical product management that comes into this. And like, okay, are you clear on what you're solving for? Are you clear on your problem space? Do you understand what that success looks like when you're going to do that? And it's, like I say, you go through these experimentation phases, like in the last question, where maybe you're dabbling around in it a little bit, but really getting clear on your solution space allows you to find that path to scale your work successfully. And I'll give you an example. Like we run the financial systems at Microsoft, and there's all kinds of stuff we do, and one of them we have to really analyze is Azure performance. And so we have this system called Azure Consumed Revenue, and just think of it as like all of the emissions of all the meters, all the consumption across Microsoft. And I don't remember how many data points it is a day, but millions and millions of data points that we get from all these resource providers and all these meters and all these subscriptions. And then our CFO, 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀, obviously is very, very keen to understand the performance of this thing. And so the finance team has a goal. Every Tuesday, they have to provide this data set and analytics to Amy. Well, like I say, millions of data points, we got to go through this. Maybe there's some strange things that happen. Maybe there are errors in it, et cetera. And so we would actually start this process with finance on a Friday, get the work done on a Monday so we could publish this thing on a Tuesday. And it was kind of weird because Friday comes around, pretty quickly. And then on Saturday you got a call, and then on Sunday you got a call, and we're like, geez, like this is terrible, right? One, the data is 3 days old when it gets to Amy, but by the way, every Saturday at 2 o'clock we're on this call. And so we kick off this project, and the project was called Save the Weekend, which is, we're looking at all these results and all this stuff, coming off of the system. And we built the AI anomaly model to go through and actually perform the analysis for us. So rather than, kind of serially looking at all these slices of data, instead, this model spits it out and says, well, this meter, this customer, this region, oh, there's a data center outage here, whatever it is, and it spits out the analysis for us. We then hooked it up to an LLM, so it's not just a bunch of variances, but it actually goes through and it scripts this out. And so every time we publish, it gets like this nice little paragraph that says all the things that are going on. And so the finance team can now take this and they can literally like, I'm just going to copy this into an email and ship this thing off to Amy. And we're kind of like, awesome. We went from 3 days of work to maybe 15 minutes in doing that. And once we did that, the next thing we did is hooked up the chat bot. So if you see the results of X, you can go, oh, tell me more about this and that, and so it'll kind of spit out the next script. So it's kind of a neat story, but for us, like from a PM standpoint, we're like, okay, how do we save the weekend? How do we knock 3 days out of this process? How do we get it to a point where if Amy wants that flash, she doesn't have to wait till Tuesday. She can call us on a Thursday or a Friday, or hopefully not a Saturday anymore, to go do that work. But that's a good example of putting some of these pieces together, to really scale it and deliver something of high value to your stakeholders.
Talking about adoption, I think there's nothing better than call a project Save the Weekend.
Yeah, yeah, it's good for us, yeah.
So so we talked about starting with experimentation, right? And then scaling. And now you might have things that are already scaled, that are working, production, saving hours, right? Moving from minutes to just seconds, saving weekends, right? You have all that going on. How are you balancing the innovation and the production solutions, right? Keeping those two things moving and the balance as you are in a highly regulated industry.
Well, first of all, I'll say sometimes Friday doesn't come fast enough. I'm just going to, I was just thinking, when it comes to reporting to the CFO, I completely understand. But, as, to your question about balancing innovation and scaling, we have to do both. Honestly, we are in the early innings. We are not at the stage where the production execution is taking a majority of the time. We still have a lot of opportunity, to experiment, to pilot things. Honestly, and I feel like this will be the case for, at least a year, maybe a couple of years, is we're just scratching the surface. There's so much of these legacy processes, workflow, interaction, that are built in that I feel like we'll have tons of opportunity to innovate. We continue to regularly, I talked about focusing on a key area. We have a large business. We operate in, more than half the country. We operate in Europe. We have a, very diverse portfolio of products and clients. We are going, in a very deliberate and phased manner. And once we have solved some of the more obvious problems, we are moving and, we are again using the creativity and power of the community, but also power of our partners, PwC, Microsoft, other folks, to then start to tackle other problems. And we are not approaching all of these as, traditional projects. Ken talked about, having that product mindset, PMing things. We need to think about product. This has also allowed us to think about experiences. So now we can actually focus on those. So as we are running, we are constantly running, let's say, hackathons or innovation cycles, and we are starting from that problem state, and we are starting from that experience. Rather than trying to make a product slightly better, we are trying to redesign and reimagine what that experience is delivering. And this, we have gone from weeks and months of prototyping to now we can try things in a day. We were just talking about that example, earlier today you were giving. We can try those things and see if it works. Maybe not in a production environment setting in a regulated industry, but we can try those things in a limited fashion within hours and days now. And that has really excited both our business partners and our technology teams. So it's, I feel like we are in early innings, we have the momentum going, and this will enable a whole lot more innovation than ever before.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about regulated industries, or if you think about, the world that I sit in, which is around finance, like compliance is not it's not an optional activity. You have to do that, and that's part of your job, or as I, sort of joke, maybe not joke, but say I consider those things conditions of employment. Like if I don't do that, then I'm not really doing my job. I don't know that AI innovation and compliance necessarily have to be at odds with each other. And I think when you look at the amount of work that you put into, SOX controls, privacy, GDPR, like all of those sorts of things, like oftentimes underneath this, there's like just a ton of manual processes, right? People tracking stuff on spreadsheets or auditing financial results through samples, right? And if you don't think that AI can do a better job than a random sample of your revenue contracts or revenue accounting? Of course it can. And so I think there's actually an opportunity to help some of those compliance or regulated asks or things that you have in your space by actually using AI to improve processes that don't really scale. Like I say, revenue accounting is a good one because we all have, sort of crazy custom revenue contracts, IFRS, ASC 606, all of this kind of stuff, super complicated and super difficult to prove out unless you really get in the weeds of anything. And like AI can help unlock, some of that insight or some of that value. I was telling these guys about another one we did around trade screening. I'm sure we're all involved in like, oh, there are all these, denied party lists that you have to comply with. They're different around the world. And, how do you screen those things accurately? How do you reduce the amount of manual toil when you do get something that you think may be a customer you can't interact with or something like that? And like, those are areas where you can actually use AI to improve your results or accelerate your cycle times on how you actually execute those processes. So I think, you still have to look at it from a compliance and what are the rules lens, but if you dig under the covers, the amount of manual work or inefficient work that you do to support these processes may be, I don't know, maybe more than you think. And I think we're discovering that and learning that a lot right now.
Actually, one of the things, if I can add, one of the pilots we are even trying with PwC is we have thousands of controls. We have thousands of controls, and we are using AI to actually simplify. Yeah. So we are using AI. We are working closely with our risk partners, but we are using AI to get a better picture of what controls we have, what duplications we have, what are just not well-written controls. So there is a huge opportunity for us to use AI on both sides.
I really like those AI examples when you're talking about from a regulation, risk, compliance perspective, like teams. You cannot have hundreds or thousands of people to analyze everything, right? So at the end of the day, you are sacrificing on the side of not being able to look at everything. You are taking the samples that you think are the higher risks ones, right? But through Gen AI, now you can look at the whole thing with with a marginal incremental cost. So those use cases to me are really important. And what I think somehow is a good segue to, we have talked about use cases, innovating, scaling, but people is at the center of all this, right? The workforce. So we were talking earlier today, is that being, there's an adoption barrier in some cases, right? There's an upskilling also, kind of you both have, and PwC, young workforces, right? That you would imagine that they are using it more and more often, but I don't think we are seeing the adoption levels that we would like, potentially. I don't know, what do you think?
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, certainly people, and don't take this the wrong way, people are the slowest part of this equation, right? AI is the fastest tech in the history of tech, and we're all struggling to understand it, to adopt it, to know how it works in our ecosystem. I struggle, right? And so, there, at least in my mind, there are a couple things. One, all of this work still starts with a person and it ends with a person. Somebody has to decide whatever it is we're going to go do, and somebody has to decide if whatever we've done at the end of this is actually the right thing. Now, everything in the middle changes. Who writes the software, who executes the test cases, how all that is orchestrated, that does change. But I think making sure that people know they're still in charge of making these decisions, and that AI is not, it's not smarter than that. I also think at least something we've had to do is to really embed the discovery and the aspect of an AI culture in the teams. And so in my team, every M1 organization, in their staff meetings, every week somebody has to bring in an AI example or an AI story. Hey, what are you doing in your day job? What did you discover about AI this week? And how did you learn this, or how did you try this? And so getting people to kind of dig in and realize that, yeah, this is here, this is part of your job, this isn't just, a tool you're going to use, this is how you're going to operate every single day. And so I think there's a ton of culture in that. That is absolutely the hardest thing to move. But that's about discovery. That's about just, kind of rolling up your sleeves and getting in there. But I think, building teams that believe in AI will allow us to embrace it in a way that is actually, I would say, effective as well as responsible.
Yep.
From my part, I'll say, one of the early on the principles we adopted from responsible AI was having human in the loop. But human in the loop doesn't mean that somebody is there for checking the box, right? You have to have an empowered human in the loop. And for that to be effective, now you can do those things faster, you still need to do it responsibly. So for that to be effective, that human in the loop has to be completely up to speed on what they are actually doing, what's expected of them, and how to best use that capability effectively. And to that end, what we are doing is internally, using a persona-based approach, we are rolling out a learning and education program to our entire enterprise. We believe, you all trust us with your money. We need to make sure we are doing things effectively. We are doing things in the right way. So we are making sure whether you are you are somebody who is interacting with a client, whether you are building a system, whether you are a decision maker in the process, you need to know what's the most effective and the right way to leverage AI for those roles. So that every time somebody is interacting, because whether we realize it or not, we are all using AI throughout the day, personal and professional life. So making sure that we are giving you the right tools, but the right education at the right time and at the right point to go with it is really important for us to harness that power.
We are running also in PwC an extensive AI program to upskill our 75,000 people, from partners all the way to staff, because we are also reinventing the way we deliver services, right? So totally agree with that. We are in November 2025. 2026 is around the corner, right? Everybody likes to talk about predictions, what is going to happen. We think from our consulting side that a lot of the AI work is going to be about having solutions that accelerate getting to value. And that is going to have for us a really kind of a strong aspect for building industrial kind of specific industry solutions, functional solutions, finance, what is the future of the CFO office with an agentic workforce, right? How are you looking at 2026? What are the things that you want to accomplish, or also predictions that you think are going to be in the AI market?
Yeah, that's the part I hope is not getting recorded and being played back in January. It's a tough one, right? Look, anytime a new technology comes, the first thing that we try to do is solve existing problems. And we have done that effectively. And we'll continue to do that because there's a lot of opportunity. This is one of the few times in my lifetime that I've seen that we have this broad capabilities that apply to just about everything. People ask me, where do you see application of it? And I'm usually at a loss because I see it applying everywhere. I think what we are starting to see now is completely different uses of this capability. So, we used, throughout the industry, we are using Gen AI for better, developer productivity. But what we are starting to see now is a whole different way of software being constructed and that interface being created that's much more general purpose than ever before. So if I have to, as I look ahead, I would see us, creating products in a completely different way that solve more end-to-end problem rather than segmenting a product that solve a particular problem. I was just having a conversation about, vacation planning. We, in our household now, plan our vacations completely differently than 12 months ago. Hopefully it's better, we'll know. But we actually do it very differently. So what you are going to see is doing things, not just doing things differently, faster, more accurately, but doing different things.
I lived 10 years in Barcelona, and another partner from PwC is flying there, right? So I created a custom kind of agent where I did some deep research, generated something, uploaded it, and then I created a 7-day plan for him. And now he can ask like detailed by hour plan and everything. And like, he was fascinated. He was fascinated.
I want a copy of that.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens in a year? I don't know. I mean, what we were doing 6 weeks ago is different than what we were doing 6 weeks before that. And I think that, all we know is it's going to be different, right? And what used to be chatbots has evolved into agents. And what's the thing after agents? That's a little bit to be seen. I think, when I look ahead, there is a lot of, sort of what you talked about. If you think about a lot of our workflows today, it's about, populating data in forms or populating UXs with content somehow, and we spend a lot of time validating or transferring or, confirming things like that. And so I believe a lot of those, modes that we operate in today, like a lot of that stuff goes away, and you will become much more interactive around, hey, please, like I say, please plan my vacation, please, or in our world, please populate this journal entry, whatever it is, and like you'll be able to tell these systems to do those things, and they will actually do them with high fidelity in a way that we don't do that today. I think what happens at the end of this, and it happens both in the workflows, it happens in your vacation planning, in our world it happens in software development, all of the things that used to be kind of the sticking points, the constraints, like those do change. And so if you think about vacation planning, like, okay, what used to be the constraint on vacation planning? Well, like you got to go spend hours and hours and hours doing all this research and finding this place or that place and booking this ticket and on and on. And like, okay, like that's not going to be the long part of planning your vacation anymore, right? Or we talk about coding, and it used to be like we're always stuck in how many developer hours do you have to go build this, that, or the other thing, and capacity and priorities, and sort of this, relentless process of trying to squeeze as much work out of some fixed capacity as you can. Okay, well, great, like, you got these co-pilots that are going to write all this code for you. Okay, well, maybe that's not the constraint anymore. Maybe it's the adoption of your systems or adoption that your users are going to have that's actually going to slow you down. And so when I look ahead, it's like, how do the constraints shift as AI removes some of those traditional or pre-existing barriers that live in whatever ecosystem you're in, whether it's the examples of being a consumer or working in finance or working in engineering or wherever it is. And like, what do those constraints look like? I don't know, but I'm certain that they're going to be a little different than the models we work in today. And so I think that'll challenge all of our assumptions on how we get work done. And it's going to be a fascinating journey.
There is two, every time we talk about technology, we focus on technology or we focus on the problem statement. There are two parts that we don't actually think enough of. One is our growing comfort level with that technology. And the second is the ecosystem approach, evolution. And I bring that up because we are all much more comfortable in November 2025 using this technology than in November 2024, right? So yes, the technology the capabilities have evolved, but so has significantly our comfort level, and we are able to let it do more for us. And it's really important to highlight that in an agentic environment, right? We are slowly going from a chatbot to a controlled agent to a semi-autonomous agent to a much, the level of autonomy is just going to grow. So that's one. Second is, as more and more things get integrated in this ecosystem, it's really important to understand that we could have done this vacation planning last year or the year before. But now, as you were talking about an hour-by-hour schedule in Barcelona, having those capabilities also have integration with weather patterns, with other factors around it. You can actually move around things, and it will take into account. So we have to, that growing ecosystem is really important for us because that increases the effectiveness of the network effect, I'll call.
And something you were saying is that capacity gap that we were talking about, right? How we, like organizations, cannot do all the backlog, take care of all the backlog, and how we were talking maybe a little bit naive earlier today, and I think it was me, saying well, we are going to be able to remove that capacity gap, right? And Prashant, you were saying well, there's going to be a gap somewhere else, right? So as we learn more and we are going to be able to develop faster and reduce times to customer service, we are going to start seeing other things, right, where we will need to go next. So I think it's obviously a moving target. We have a couple more minutes and we would like to open for some questions. But before we do that, what would be your, sometimes we ask, what would be your recommendation for the audience to do in the next 6 months? And I think that in today's world, 6 months is too far. What would you be telling them to do in the next 6 weeks to move their AI journey forward?
I mean, a little bit of it depends on where you are, but I think, for anybody that's very early, don't sit on the fence. Get in there, go discover, go learn, go put those forums in place to really, think about how you're going to embed it in your culture, in your processes, in everything you do. One, because it obviously it's a huge opportunity, but two, the tech is moving very, very quickly, faster than anything I think we've ever seen. And getting in there and getting on that bus, getting on that train to evolve on that journey as the tech goes, I think is important. And if you're hesitating, crossing that gap and getting engaged, is going to be more difficult given the velocity of the tech.
I would say, get started. Don't worry about which model to use. I get this question a lot, both internally and externally. These models are evolving very fast, so don't worry about which one to use. Use something. And build the right partnership. There's a lot of folks who are willing to help. You're not going to know everything on day one. You're not going to go production on day one either. So it's really important to, again, get started. Don't worry about which tech, and make sure you move incrementally, but you can move very fast on it.
Yeah, I think your businesses better than anybody else, but there's people that has done it before. So there are good consulting partners that can help accelerate your knowledge to kind of a reality. So I think that's really important. I also think that we have been talking about LLMs since when? November, December 2022. We think that maybe that's the only thing that's going to happen, but I know there's people working on the next set of things, trying some other cognitive approaches to develop new models. So whenever that hits, if you haven't started with the LLM side, you are going to be much far away, and the gap is going to be bigger for you to kind of. So I totally agree on the get going, get your hands dirty, create a kind of an agent next week, right? Either in a Copilot Studio, Foundry. Just get your hands dirty, because to your point, we could have done that vacation planning 2 years ago, but now I'm doing it because I feel so comfortable that it's just the way to do it, right? So we have 5 minutes. I don't know if anybody maybe has a question for Prashant or for Ken.
I've got one. So Prashant, you were talking about this gives you an opportunity to reimagine an entire process. And Kent, you were saying you're still starting with the human at the beginning. you still have a human at the end, but everything in between is up for grabs. In both of those cases, you may have multiple people who are responsible for a part of the existing process, which means you've got multiple people that you need to get on board from your reality is going to change. When you start to look at that end-to-end process reimagination and knowing everything in the middle is up for grabs, how do you bring multiple different people on board and along for that journey, knowing that it's going to disrupt not just one of their jobs and the step that they're responsible for, but what multiple people do on a daily basis?
I mean, you're kind of hitting at the cultural change. I mean, I don't know that, I mean, agree on the problem. I don't know that that's unique to AI in terms of delivering a program. And I think, at least for me, like that with any of these, conflicts or resistance, like you got to start with what you agree on, right? Are we here to make this more efficient? Are we here to learn something new? Are we here to delight our customers or our stakeholders in a way that's different than maybe we do today? And I think grounding everybody on like, hey, here's why we're here will help, clarify the goal and get people out of sort of the mindset of like, I'm responsible for some vertical and that's all that matters. Now, I don't want to, suggest that that's an easy, task to overcome, but I think you still have to ground it around that and get people comfortable knowing that things are going to change and like you're either on or you're not. But obviously this is coming whether people are comfortable with it or not. So like I say, it's sort of it's a human problem for sure.
I would also add, the Conway's law, right? The product looks like the organizational structure. When we think about empowered humans in this, supported by AI, I think about this is where over the last 130 plus years, we have thought about, things, breaking down tasks, assembly line, specialization. This allows us to generalize a little bit more. So maybe the chain doesn't look that complicated or has as many handoff in future that it has today. So when I think about reimagining that, if I'm a customer and I call in or I walk into a branch or I'm interacting with you, how can one empowered human solve my problem? So that's my take on it.
Thank you.
Any other question? Well, that was good for an early morning on a Thursday.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ken, Prashan, for the trip and for the time. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you.